We're continuing in our study of emotionally healthy spirituality. The main premise that we have been showing is, and discussing and demonstrating, is that even when we come to God and He delivers us from sin, He begins to transform our character immediately. We see life differently. We have this salvation experience, but we still have struggles that we have seen consistently throughout our lives. And the reason is there are many events, many aspects of our formative years, especially in adolescence, in puberty ages, and then even traumatic events in life that can really skew the way, and hopefully you've seen, as we've discussed and we'll discuss even deeper, it actually changes the physiology of your brain, the chemical construct of your brain. So you begin to pursue different things for different reasons, to fill the brokenness, to fill the void that was left, whatever the case might be. In the process of that discussion, we made the point that it's important to realize that, because when the Bible is talking about in Ephesians 2, and again in James 4, plus other places it's addressing it, Paul heavily in the book of Romans, when it talks about you are being opposed, you are being engaged in a spiritual struggle, and there are three primary enemies that you have to face. Anyone remember who they are? The flesh, the world, and the devil. So the flesh is you, your tendencies, your desires, your learned behaviors. The world is the system that is opposed to God's kingdom, that is drawing you into this. And a lot of people don't give the world a lot of credit, but a lot of Christians live their life based on secular ethics and secular reasoning, and then they sprinkle some scriptures on it and say, voila, Christianity. And it's actually very contrary to what Christianity says. That's where the world comes in, and then of course the devil is opposing you at every turn for the purpose of controlling and ultimately possessing, and I don't mean like exorcism, though that could happen, but I mean owning you for eternity. So, what is it that the flesh, the world, and the devil use to pull us asunder? Those things that happened in our past. The enemy has been keeping tabs on you. And your flesh certainly knows it and likes the way it feels when you satisfy your longings or overcome a bad day by these behaviors. That's the heart of what's going on. So, from this, we've been talking about the 7 deadly sins, and how in early Christian theology, it was understood that it started off really as 8, but 2 of them were combined, and you see 7 principal sins, also known as capital sins. Why are they called capital sins? Has it been that long? All other sins stem from them. So, all of the sins that we encounter originate in pride, and that's very biblical. Pride is like the commander-in-chief. The 7 deadly sins are the generals on the battlefield. And these are the ones that we're looking at. From these 7, all of the other sins will originate, because these 7 will use those kind of temptations to activate those particular desires. So when we read in James 4 on Sunday morning not so long ago, that you have not, and you asked not, but before that he says, what is the cause of wars among you? You lust that you do not have, therefore you commit murder. And I said, do you guys see right there, capital sin? You see that, where lust is coming in, and then it is bringing on other aspects of sin. So we've talked about lust, and we've talked about gluttony, 2 sins that originate from natural inclinations that are God-given. The desire to procreate, the sexuality, and food. we're talking about the continuance of the species. That was given to us by God, but in our brokenness, we misappropriate it. We pervert it. We twist it to our own desires, and then we start going from a virtue to a vice. Tonight, we're going to talk about greed. Now, you might say, okay, in my spiritual walk, when you're talking about emotionally healthy spirituality and the void that's in my heart and the problems that I have that lead me to this kind of substance abuse or this anger or this bitterness, what does greed have to do with any of this? Well, it has a lot to do with it. Because when people emerge with a low self-worth, a low self-esteem, they will typically try to find self-worth or define themselves in two places. This is what Robert McGee, for those who went to the School of Ministry, they're very familiar with Robert McGee. He calls it the satanic formula. Self-worth equals, and I use an acronym, SWOOP. Self-worth equals others' opinions and personal performance. We find our self-worth in what others say about us or what we think they think about us and what we achieve. Where do you think greed falls into this? Which category? The others' opinions or the personal performance? So I hear personal performance. Anyone say others' opinions?
I say that just because you're wife and I feel like you might be greedy for the
Attention.
attention of others, yeah, and the praise of
That's the biblical definition. You're both correct. Greed is not simply materialistic. It can go beyond that. So why is greed a problem? Because it is the root of our searching for our identity, our self-worth, our importance apart from God and apart from God's plan. And it ends up very empty. That's why you see so many people who may achieve great things and are lonely and are broken and are bitter because it didn't solve anything for them. They achieve their success and they commit suicide. How many times do you see famous people do that? Or they enter into heavy drug addiction because they can't cope. Star athletes who no longer can play because of their body condition, bottoming out in unbelievable depression because they don't know who they are now. And that world has just left them behind. People who win the lottery and end up in serious anxiety or depression or whatever the case might be because they find that it didn't answer all their problems. It actually created more. Time and again, this is what happens. So when we look at greed, greed can certainly be defined as loving money and material possessions too much. But also, it can be too great a desire for applause, or recognition, or someone's job, or someone's spouse. That can all be greed. That we think, if I had that, you guys have heard me use this many times. Well, some of you have. Some of you are new here tonight, so you've never heard me say this. If you didn't have the preface of me teaching, and somebody walked up to you and handed you a question, and it said, if I had more blank, I would be happier, and said, you have 5 seconds to answer that. Typically, whatever you would use to fill in the blank, that's an idol in your life. Because you're telling yourself, if I had more money, if I had more time, if I had a better job, if I had a better spouse, if I had more recognition, if I had more fame, I would be happier. All of my problems would go away. You are looking at those things as the means by which you will find happiness. Ultimately, All philosophy that you take from Plato, Aristotle, they're saying, look, the ultimate goal in life is happiness. Christianity wouldn't deny that. But what its answer is that true happiness can only be found in God. Because He is life. He is the sustainer of life. He is joy. He is peace. So whatever we're looking to make us happy is taking us away from God. And greed is the appetite that drives us to those things, telling us, you just need that, and you'll be good. It's not simply having things, but having them inordinately. Thomas Aquinas called it the immoderate love of possessing. So the important thing about greed is, you push the pendulum and you go the other way to asceticism, which is, I'm just going to abstain from everything. I'm not going to own anything. This might step on some toes. I don't mean to be insensitive, but really Scripture doesn't support that at all. God created this world as good and intended for us to enjoy it. God is not opposed to you having things. He's opposed to things having you. That's when we step into greed, when it begins to control us in that way. So greed, often called avarice. Avarice is from the Latin word avaritia, yes, because the root word is aveo, A-V-O, and it means I desire. I desire. The question is, what do you desire? And why do you desire it? Do you desire that more than God, and why? Ultimately, this occurs when our motives are selfish or hedonistic, or the means by which we are obtaining something. So it might be something God's perfectly okay with you having, but you obtain it in an illegitimate manner. Think about the prodigal son. The inheritance was his, but he obtained it by an illegitimate manner. He told his father, "You're dead to me," or "I wish you were dead. Give me my inheritance now." Luke 15 carries a lot of issues on greed. Maybe we'll revisit these. So, greed is when our trust is placed in anything other than God as the provider of happiness, satisfaction, the healing of our brokenness, the fulfillment of our emptiness. And the reality is, greed has been with us since the Garden of Eden. When people dismiss greed, they forget that that's how this whole thing got started. You will be like God. There's also a little vainglory in that, which we'll talk about in a later week. Greed has always been a problem. The prophets Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, Amos, and Micah all vehemently denounced greed by name and the problem that it caused. Jesus speaks more on the issue of money than he does any other topic. Why do you think that is? Because the one thing that's going to get you from Jesus faster than anything else is the love of money. Or trusting money to provide what God desires to provide. Whether it be through money or other means. Of course, the key verse, Matthew 6:24. Anyone know what that says?
It's easier for a...
No, that's the number 2. That's a good guess. You're close to it, though.
Nobody can love God and money?
No one can serve God
masters.
and mammon. Mammon being that only God. Well, agreed. You will love one and hate the other. Or you will hate one and love the other. He's saying it's not possible. Why is it not possible to be godly and greedy? I'm not asking a philosophical question, a biblical question. Why is it not possible to be godly and greedy? Anyone? What? It's not godlike at all. God is not greedy. God's a giver. For God so loved the world, He gave. That's right. So they're not compatible. But can't we be a little greedy and a little godly at the same time? Nice little spring mix going on. Why is it not possible? When you're greedy, you're worshiping another god.
Yourself.
It might be yourself. You're putting your trust, your hopes, your faith in that thing to provide you what you want. That's worship. You're pursuing it, perhaps greater than you're pursuing God. Now think, we work 40-hour work week. How many hours do we give to God? But God says, hey, give me, that time you're reading your scripture and prayer. I'm with you all day, be in constant communion with me. But how many of us are willing? We would jump at the opportunity for 20 hours overtime. But we would jump at the same time for 20 hours in a Bible study. Or a night of prayer and praise. Okay, moving on. The epistles reflect the same concern. In 1 Corinthians, in Ephesians 5 is a huge one. 1 Timothy, Hebrews, James talks about greed, as we saw Sunday morning 2 weeks ago. The Apostle Paul equates greed with idolatry in Ephesians 5. He flat out says it's idolatry. He echoes this in Colossians 3. He insists that greed not be mentioned among Christians in Ephesians 5. Don't even go down that discussion, that avenue, he says. He flat out says, 1 Corinthians 6, the greedy will not inherit the kingdom of God. Oh, we're quick to say that the homosexual, the adulterer, and the fornicator won't inherit the kingdom of God. We don't often note that also in that category is the greedy. Woof! In fact, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, don't even associate with those who are controlled by greed. In the same way that he says, abstain from the immoral brother and remove him from the congregation. He says, have nothing to do with the greedy because they'll corrupt you. This understanding does not end in the scriptures. The early church writers, especially those that were in the eastern side, the Greek writers, they viewed greed not only as materialistic, but lust for power, especially among other things. And flat out said there's no room for greed in a just society. Now, spoiler alert, you live in a capitalistic society. Guess what capitalism is really centered on? Greed. Now, that doesn't mean that in order to function in a capitalistic society, you have to be greedy. You can be very godly in a capitalistic society and use the blessings of your labor to bless others. But consider for a moment the fact that we don't talk about greed a whole lot today, not even in the church. Because it's no longer considered a vice. In many ways, it's seen as a virtue. Anyone ever see the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas? His character, Gordon Gekko, what was his famous catchphrase? Greed is good. That was on bumper stickers all over the place when that movie came out. Our society encourages greed, though it doesn't come out right in its verbiage of this. We don't call it greed. We call it financial success or economic security. Greed is socially acceptable in this capitalistic world. We admire the high achiever. And once again, there's nothing wrong with having high achievement if your heart is godly and your feet are grounded. It's where it takes us. Think about the people who started off so good, so honest, but then they began chasing the dollar, or they began chasing the title, or they began chasing the next accolade, and how it affected their relationship with others, their ethics, their integrity. Greed manifests in many different forms. The cutthroat competitor, the workaholic, the swindler, the miser, the gambler. That last one shocked anybody? You know, as a Wesleyan Pentecostal church, we do not advocate gambling. My wife and I have twice been to Las Vegas. Never dropped a dime in a slot machine, never took a drop of alcohol, and had the time of our lives. We don't play the lottery. Why? Well, it ain't gonna hurt anybody. Do you know how much poverty hurts people? And do you know who typically plays the lottery? People who can't afford to. But even beyond that, so it's contributing to an institution that is oppressing people groups. But even beyond that, the cultural mandate that God gives in Genesis is this: go work. I've given you this land, so do it. Be fruitful, multiply, grow the fields, enjoy the produce, be blessed by all that there is, but you're going to go till it. The Bible instructs us that to have material gain without work, without cost, without sacrifice, is contrary to God. God worked 6 days creating this. I hear a lot of people say, well, you know, man, if Adam and Eve wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have to go to work in the morning. You know, that's part of the curse of God. No, it's not. Work is a part of the blessing of God. He's a creator. And he created us to be creators. Material gain is not bad, but it becomes sinful when it is secured without work. Think about the prodigal son. Scholars estimate that there are about 2 million compulsive or pathological gamblers in the United States, and there may be another 8 million that could be classified as problem gamblers. So I had someone once come to me and they said, man, if I won the lottery, I'd give the church this, I'd give the church this. You know what? Instead of giving a tithe, I'd just live off the 10%. And I said, you know, great. But here's the problem. I said, what you're doing is justifying. What you really want is that 10%. Because you think that's what's going to answer your financial problems, your marital problems, your identity crisis. And so you're saying, God, I'm willing to give you 90% if you'll give me this 10%. You're still looking at the 10% as your God.
Also, Pastor will talk about this on Sunday, but David said he doesn't want to give anything to God that came to him for nothing.
Doesn't cost him
He didn't-
anything.
I will not sacrifice to the Lord that which costs me nothing.
So I'm like, all right, you're going to offer that to God, but really, it didn't cost you anything.
Yeah. So when people ask me, you know, is it a sin to play the lottery? I ask, why are you playing it? Ask yourself that. Why are you playing it? And if it's, well, man, I'm just really in the Bible. Well, is your God your provider? Does he own the cattle on 1,000 hills? Has he declared in his scripture the manner by which he will bless you? And beyond that, can you have peace and happiness apart from that and be content? Godliness with contentment is great gain, Paul said. So, greed stands against most Christian virtues, especially patience, contentedness, self-denial, selflessness. But it remains problematic. You know, we have talked in recent weeks about lust, about gluttony. Both are misappropriation or misuse of virtues that are given by God in order to perpetuate humanity, and then we abuse them to try to satisfy our own longings. Greed comes from outside of our God-given nature. It began with the consumption of the prohibited fruit in the Garden of Eden. So the natural aspect of greed is actually in regard to our second nature, our Adamic nature, our sinful nature, our fallen condition. Food and sex were aspects of our pre-fallen condition and remain so. Greed, now they're perverted after the fall. Lust and gluttony become prevalent after the fall, where food and sex was before. But greed begins with the free choice of a corrupt and evil will. And it is a learned behavior. There are societies that know nothing of greed in this world, believe it or not. And even when you see little babies and they're protecting their toys and they're taking, that's not a greed aspect. That's a nature of trying to have identification of social boundaries and things of that nature. When I'm talking about greed, I'm talking about the idea that if I had that, I would be better. I would be happier. I would be satisfied. And that's a learned behavior. Manufacturers and advertisers have shaped us to be covetous. There are numerous studies that show this. Guys, my undergrad degree is in marketing. You can trust me when I say it is entirely premised on convincing people they need something they have no clue they need, want, desire, or that it even exists. Making a consumer. There's a famous saying in marketing, you do not have a customer until you have a return customer. How do you get them back? Now, sometimes they cross ethical lines. You guys ever heard the subliminal messages they were doing in movie theaters in the 70s, early 80s? Where you'd be watching, and then there would be one frame that would show a bag of popcorn, and it happened so fast your mind couldn't even catch it, but subliminally you saw it, and all of a sudden you're like, man, I'd like some popcorn. And they did studies and found popcorn sales went up like 60% when that happened. And then after you had all that salty popcorn, guess what the next picture was that showed?
A drink.
You're watching the movie and you didn't even see it. Man, I'd like a Coke. And you went out and bought that $7 Coke that you drank in 2 swallows. There's all kinds of aspects of this. Did you know that today you will see 3,000 sales messages? The average American will see 3,000 sales messages today. Think about your commercials. I'm not watching 3,000. Some people are. But within every commercial, there's more than one sales message. Think about product placement in TV shows and movies. It's there for a reason. Look at what E.T. did for Reese's Pieces. Has anyone ever ate Reese's Pieces? They're horrible. And they're still on the market because of all the people that got hooked on them with E.T. Right? Billboards, radio, flipping through Facebook. We were just talking about Reese's Pieces. I bet you if you pull up your Facebook right now, there'll be an ad for Reese's Pieces because Alexa's listening.
It's true. It is.
Think of all the ads that you see on that. Newspapers, sides of buses. You're constantly inundated with these. We're taught that you need this. You deserve a break today. You can't miss. Don't miss out. Greed is a necessary psychological fuel for a capitalist and consumer society. Because the way that society works is by selling. In fact, if you don't believe me, Go study it out. At the turn of the 20th century, the industrialization of our Western culture found that it was producing more than more than the American population was consuming. So the answer was not to reduce production. It was how do we get them to consume more. And then you start seeing the advertising movement. That was the goal. Don't need a show of hands, but just think to yourself, how much stuff do I have that I really don't need? How many things did I ask for Christmas, or did I go out and buy that are still in the package? Or sitting on a shelf? And I'm not saying, how dare you do it? It's because it's marketed to us in such a way. Does anyone ever go to the grocery store? Or does everyone have everything delivered these days? When you go to the grocery store, do you know that suppliers pay premium dollars for the aisles at the checkout? The newspapers, the magazines, the candy, the gum, the drinks. You know why? They're called impulse buys. That's exactly it. Oh, wow, okay, yeah. Maybe I'm not going to buy a 6-pack of Hershey's. Hey, here's one, and it's on sale. Good deal. Now, here's the kicker. I'll go into the grocery store, I'll be standing in line, and I look over, and it's not even subliminal. Hey, there's a Diet Mountain Dew. Man, I'm kind of thirsty. Let me grab the 20-ounce Diet Mountain Dew for $2 when they have a 12-pack on sale right there for $3. And how many of you buy that Diet Mountain Dew? That soda that's right there. It's an impulse buy. They know you will buy it there. Has anyone ever heard the phrase, don't go shopping when you're hungry?
Yeah.
You know why? Because it's not only that you'll buy everything, but it is positioned in specific locations. Ask your manager. They do studies on this. How do you lay out a grocery store to get maximum purchase? How do you present that material? Every time you go in a grocery store, every item you see is being marketed to you. By the color selection, think about how good that pizza looks on the box. Has anyone ever had a pizza that looked that good when it came out of the oven? My pizza looks like the cardboard that the thing came in. They're marketing it to you. Because that's the society in which we live. We are like the prodigal in Luke 15. He was too eager to acquire wealth, and then too eager to spend it unwisely on things of little or no value. He is wasteful with money. He does not value money. Think about that for a minute. He did not value money. He wasted it. It's pretty easy to not value money you didn't work for. Back to that point. You know, if we're talking about maybe buying something for the house, and I say, okay, kids, everybody chip in $50, they might be like, why do we need this? If I say, hey guys, I'm thinking about buying one of these for the house. Oh, that'd be awesome! It's easy to spend money that ain't yours, right? A lot of times we work hard for money, but we don't value the money that we've earned. Why? Because we're driven by greed. Because money is only a means to an end. We're looking for status. We're looking for supplement. At its heart, greed is the dependence on money. Well, it's one of two things. Greed is the dependence on money, accolation, achievement to overcome a fear of lack. You have a fear that you will not have enough. You have a fear that people think less of you. You have a fear that you are not worth much. So you try to overcome that with these items or these accolades. And so the achievements, be they monetary or otherwise, really represent security and freedom from fear and freedom from want. And these are deep human needs, but we're meeting it in the wrong way. So the tendency is to substitute that thing's promise of self-sufficiency and security for God's promise to be our provider and our protector. That's why greed is so remarkably difficult. Now, the second reason that greed really falls into this is it is often used to elevate our self-identity and our self-worth. So, money and goods are used to confer status. You know, we're no longer simply trying to keep up with the Joneses. We're trying to distinguish ourselves from the Joneses in society today. I see people regularly who will pull up in a $65,000 Mercedes-Benz. I don't have a problem if you have a Mercedes-Benz. But then they'll drive home to a house that's worth about $10,000 that they don't want you to see because it's all about the image they present to everyone else. There's a problem there. Why are you so bent on people seeing you one way when you're which is forcing you to live another? You got to ask yourself, why am I doing this? That's self-worth. That's the issue there. Augustine once said this: avarice wishes to have large possessions. You, God, possess everything. I mean, how much larger can you get than that? But here's what happens. You know, sometimes we come, you know, it's hard to be the poor kid at school. I remember growing up, you know, I joke about it now, but man, when I was growing up, we'd go out and play and you drank water from a water hose and, you know, you didn't even have the little thing that you pull the handle to make the water come out. You just turned it on and you had the end of a rubber hose that had been cut off and everybody drank from that. And we came in, and my wife will tell you to this day, there are foods that I will not eat because I had to eat it constantly. I will not eat beans because I've had my fill. I will not eat a fried pork chop ever again. You can put me in the Castaway scenario of Tom Hanks and give me a box of fried pork chops and I'll be like, I'll go fishing. Because that's all we could afford. I was embarrassed as a child because all of my clothes were hand-me-downs. I didn't get to wear Nike or Reebok or anything like that. I was embarrassed when we had to walk into the generic grocery store. I hope that none of my friends were driving by who would see me. That left an impression on me, and as a result, I tried to overcome that by achievement early in my adult life. I felt that, well, hey, if I had the kind of credit, I had the kind of money, I'd go out and buy whatever I want, then hey. But you know what I found when I bought those things? None of it satisfied. That happens quite often. We have things happen to us. Look at, you know, talk to those people who are still around who went through the Great Depression. Now, my grandparents, they, until their dying day, would grow a ton of food. My grandfather would slaughter hogs. He had a pig farm. And that's how he made his money. He also ran Shine on the side. I don't recommend that. But they always had pigs to eat. And they always grew vegetables. And I remember as a child going out and pulling up the vegetables. Maybe another reason I don't eat them. And then we would can them. And my grandma had a cellar, and it was full of all these canned foods. The reason was is they learned in the Depression that you better have canned foods or you might not have food. Mm-hmm. But now some people from the Depression became very greedy because they were afraid of ever getting to that place again. things happen in our lives, traumatic events, and they cause us, well, you'll never amount to nothing. Oh yeah, well look at the title that's on my desk. Look at the car that I'm driving. A lot of times people buy those things. There's a reason they call it a midlife crisis. You're questioning your identity, your mortality. So to feel that vigorous youth again, what do? A lot of people go out and buy a Corvette. Saw a C8 sitting in the dealership for $102,000. And you know what? You're going to drive and go, I don't feel any younger. Now I got a ticket. Do you understand what I'm saying on the issue of grief? There's things that happen to us, and they're legitimate things that happen to us, and they're hurtful things that happen to us. But we try. How do we fulfill it? How did our families do it? How were we taught to do it? How does our society, the world, the marketing teach us? Here's what you need. Here's what you deserve. And we go after it. And it doesn't make us any happier. It drives us further from God because we're pursuing those things. Here's the three main things that grief's going to do. Number one, it violates God. Who's got their Bible handy? Proverbs chapter 30, first one there gets to read it. Bible drills.
Sword drill.
Sword drill.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Proverbs 30. You got it? Verses 7 through 9. Listen carefully to what Dan is saying.
Two things I ask of you, deny them not to me before I die. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me. Lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord?
Wow.
Or at least I be poor in spirit, and profane the name of my God.
I heard somebody say, wow. Proverbs 30, verses 7 through 9. Take a look at that. Read that. Pray that. Meditate on that. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me my sustenance for the day. Sort of sounds like somebody saying, give us this day our daily bread. Don't worry about what tomorrow holds, what you'll wear, what you'll eat. Tomorrow has enough problems for its own. Greed violates our relationship with God because we're seeking apart from God that which only God can provide. 1 Timothy 6 and 10. I'm not going to do a sword drill because most of you can quote it, you just might not know what it is. The love of money is...
The root of all evil.
The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Why is that? Well, why is that? Let me ask you. I know the answer. Let me see what you think. The love of money, Paul said, is the root of all kinds of evil. Why?
Is it your idol?
Becomes an idol. And what does that idol tell you to keep you coming back to it? You know, we hear people all the time. We talk about, hey, come to church. Look forward to seeing you in church. You gonna be in church, Ron? Can't wait to see you in church. Greed doesn't have that problem. It says, see you real soon. It doesn't have to send out invites, text reminders, newsletters. Let me move on. It's an idol. What is it promising you that brings you back time and again?
Happiness?
Promises you happiness. So, when we consider it as a capital sin, money is so attractive that we will commit many sins in order to acquire it. We'll bend our integrity at work. We'll lie on a resume. We'll steal from the job or from family, whatever the case might be. We'll hoodwink someone on a shady deal. We were looking at a house, and the guy already had, there was an offer that was made on the house, but we knew that the offer was below the asking price. Well, we thought they had already dropped the price. We thought the asking price was very fair. So, within a 24-hour time period, we sent them an offer, and we said, we'll give you the asking price. And the guy contacted us back and said, look, they made an offer and I made a counter offer to them. So I feel obligated to that. Now, if they don't accept the counter offer, we'll deal. But if they accept the counter offer, I just feel obligated to hold my end of, I'm very, so he was very apologetic. And we were sitting there, and we were like,
Good
don't apologize. I commend your integrity. You're doing the right thing. You're turning down extra money. What price do you put on your integrity?
Yes.
What price do you put on your integrity?
Mm-hmm.
This man is now bound by greed. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Money gives us the power to satisfy sinful desires. And then get away with sin by buying influence and immunity. Thomas Aquinas says this, because there's a theological debate. Well, how is love of money the root of all kinds of evil when the Bible says pride is the source? And Aquinas answers it brilliantly. He says, it's not that all evils arise from covetousness, but there is no evil that at some point does not arise from covetousness. He said, that's why the love of money is the root of all evil. It's a capital sin. You will see the gamut. Adultery, murder, lying, theft. I mean, fill in the blank. Any sin you can imagine, you'll find greed using that. Right? I mean, have you go home and you watch, I know you all watch all the murder mystery CSI and 48 Hours and all the true tales of crime. What are they always based on?
Money.
Greed. Somebody had something someone else
Power.
wanted, and something bad happened. I just described 50% of all television shows and movies right there. Greed.
I think about spouses who kill their spouse for the life insurance. The spouse that they loved 20 years ago and couldn't live without, and now they're killing them to get $100,000 that's going to be blown away in
Yeah.
6 months. Right.
Or a spouse who finds a lover. Why did they find a lover? Probably greed. They were looking for something. It may have been in another area that we're going to talk a little bit later about, or it may have been because of lust. But then that person says, well, I got to have that person as my wife. Let me kill her husband. That originated in greed. There's all kinds of examples on this. And we celebrate it many times. It's a pirate's life for me. Take all you can, give nothing back.
I see that where we celebrate greed in the church more than
Ruh-roh.
anywhere else. I mean, you think I want the big mega church. Not only do I want to attend that because there's so many people there. I want to be the deacon at the mega church. That's greed.
I want to have that title.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or, well, I'm going to go to that church because they can provide this, and this. As opposed to what can I provide God's kingdom? And what about the altars that are filled with, oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? I remember we were discussing once, Pastor Chris was counseling someone that I'm pretty confident is not watching this online. Please, Lord. But they're not from around here. And they said, man, I got all these bills, and they had far overextended to the point that they were like, I'm thinking about just filing for bankruptcy. But you know what? I paid my tithe, and my God's a blesser, so he's going to take care of all these bills. And we're thinking, no, he's not. That's not what tithing is.
What'd you do with the other 90%?
That's a spiritual lottery. That's not, but it violates God's intent is live within your means, be a blessing, be content. And as I bless you, you can be a blessing to others.
Be a good steward of the other 90%, and God will be a good steward of the 10%.
Sure. And as you're a steward of that, God will bless you with more so you can bless other people. and use you as a testimony to do so. I have no reason to deny that. But then we begin to pursue that. And now we're seeking the hand of God rather than the heart of God. That's what greed does. Second problem. Not only does it violate God's character, it violates our relationships with others, which we've touched on. Evagrius, who we've introduced earlier in our study, the originator, of the 8 that would become the 7. He said, just as a very leaky ship is submerged by each wave, so the person with many possessions is awash in his concerns. How many people can't contribute to ministry, not even financially, but time, effort, prayer, support, encouragement, participation, because they're so busy maintaining everything they've acquired and achieved? Now let me ask you, is that God's plan? The hallmark of well-entrenched greed is this. We have a willingness to use people to get money rather than use money to get people. Or we have a willingness to use people to get stuff rather than use stuff to get people. So, I've heard people say, oh, if you go to church this much, you have this much income. What does that have to do with anything? God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, like we just said. If you're only growing your church for the purpose of growing your income, you should not be a nonprofit business because you are now a for-profit enterprise. I said it. Oh, I said it. I'll say it again. I got no problem saying that. Revoke that 501c3.
Well.
Greed deprives us of our ability to bless because we're always trying to obtain. God told Abraham, I will bless you that you may be a blessing. Let God bless you that you may be a blessing. And ultimately, I don't have time to go into this tonight, but there is a connection between avarice and injustice. Our greed moves us to betray one another, to oppress people groups, nations. In doing so, we betray our own humanity. Third problem with greed, it violates our humanity. Humans become things in a consumer society. We are depersonalized in both the individual and relational spheres. Pope John Paul II said this, making money the measure of all things is really a cover for making human beings, the makers and controllers of money, the measure of all things, including the value of other human beings. Boom.
Makes me think of Planned Parenthood. They started selling babies that they were aborted and getting money off those body parts. So the more they've made money, the more babies they
could abort.
They could abort and that's why they fight so much to keep it legal, because Planned Parenthood is making money off these babies' arms and eyes and feet.
Yeah.
Their body organs.
Absolutely. The humanity, our humanness. I said a moment ago that money and goods are used to confer status. That's how people identify who you are. Whether you're important, what you're wearing, how you're dressed, car you drive, house you live in. John Kavanaugh once said this will shatter you. He said, we are what we possess. We are, consequently, possessed by our possessions, produced by our products, remade in the image and likeness of our own handiwork. We are revealed as commodities. Idolatry exacts its full price from us. We are robbed of our very humanity. What is he saying there? He's saying this. We always talk about you are what you eat. He's saying, no, you are what you purchase. Because that's the image you're presenting to everyone. That's where your heart is. That's what you become. That which you own. which now actually owns you, because you're now in its image.
That's why he's a book.
The problem is, just as Jesus
He's got a
put
lot
it,
of books.
where your treasure is, your heart will also be. We not only express ourselves by what we consume, but what we consume shapes what we become. We purchase things we think will make us happy, and ironically, it distracts us from the only one who can make us happy. And that's the intent of the flesh, the world, and the devil. Don't believe me? In the middle of the 20th century, Americans were half as wealthy. The average American was half as wealthy on the graduated scale as they are today. Yet people today are less satisfied, less happy, and more depressed.
Wow.
We have more money, we have more stuff, and we're less happy because we're constantly pursuing it. It's all an illusion. Let me close before I give you some things to think on through the week and pray. Let me give you a quote from C.S. Lewis. Wonderful screw tape letters. He's talking about the my of ownership. Keep telling them my church, my car, my house, my family. Keep using that word my, he's telling the young demon, as he tempts the Christian. And then he goes on to say this. And all the time, the joke is that the word mine, in its fully possessive sense, cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. In the long run, either our Father, and he's talking about Satan, this is a senior demon talking, either our Father or the enemy, God, will say mine of each thing that exists, and specifically of each person. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not to them, whatever happens. At present, the enemy says mine of everything on the pedantic, legalistic ground that he made it. Our Father hopes in the end to say mine of all things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest.
Wow.
That's the devil's side of this equation. So, what is our answer? We talked about the answer to lust. We talked about the answer to gluttony. What is the answer? And I've already said it's not to sell everything and live, with nothing but the shirt on your back. It's not asceticism. The answer is simplicity. Contentedness in simplicity. What do I mean by that? Number one, decouple spending from your sense of self-worth. Don't find your identity in what you obtain, material or otherwise. That's not how God determines your worth. Read Ecclesiastes, said you'll find simplicity is freedom. Don't live beyond your means. Enjoy, live well within your means, but be content with your means. Resolving to live for the next year at your current level of spending is a pretty good start. Or your current level of earning. Just say, okay, so I'm married to a banker. She keeps the debt to income ratio around 40%. Why? Well, because we're going to have money to give, to bless. We're going to have money in case something is needed. We're going to have money to enjoy this life that God has given us together. And we're not going to be driven by how do I pay this bill and stressed out by that. Set up a budget. Live according to that budget. Take a Sabbath rest from consumerism. For at least 1 month, refrain from going to the mall, from watching television if necessary. I skip the commercials anyway. You know what else I do? I kind of got a kick on this thing. I kind of dabbled in it before COVID-19. Now I'm like, hey, they'll deliver our groceries. Now, I mean, like some meats and stuff like that, we'll go get that, but there's a whole lot of things now I don't have to go through the impulse aisle. I don't have to come home and say, oh, yeah, I got this, and I got, oh, you saw that, did you? Yeah, I got that. I don't have to hide food and the receipt, right? Take a Sabbath rest
Oh
from
my
that stuff.
gosh.
Tithe. DeYoung makes a great comment on tithing. She says this: to spend on ourselves first and then to give away what remains, either to God or others, is to remain in the mindset that our possessions are really our own, to dispense as we see fit, and that we are the ultimate providers for ourselves. She goes on to say, tithing first and spending on ourselves later is a discipline that teaches God's ownership of all good things and our trust in his provision, as well as stewardship of goods that does not put ourselves first. Tithing is an attitude that says, Lord, it's all yours. And I'm giving back to your kingdom first and foremost. Along with tithing goes generosity. Is what you have available to others? If it is, then you'll be free from anxiety, from fear. It's not mine anyway, it's God's. It's all good. This is the inward reality of simplicity. To receive what we have as a gift from God, be content with that, and to know it's God's business, not ours, to care for what we need. We just steward what we have. That's simplicity. The test of that is whether it is easy and enjoyable to give things away. Whether it's easy and enjoyable to give things away. Because generosity's measure is not how much is given, but rather the manner in which it is given. Think about the widow with 2 mites. There's been times when folks have come in and seen something in my office, a plaque or a picture or something. Man, that's awesome. And I tell they just told them, like, here, take it. Danny did that for me. It's hanging in there. 2 mites, interestingly enough. From that time period, framed. You know, it's kind of cool that I have 2 mites with the certificate of authenticity already framed, hanging on my wall. That's pretty cool. But you know, every time I look at that, I think of him. And I'm like, man, what an awesome, he just gave that to me. That's cool. Is that a testimony that's common in your life? So, before I give you the questions for self-reflection for the week, let me offer, this is from Richard Foster, his Spirit of Discipline. 10 controlling principles, and I know I'm 5 minutes past, but please just don't be greedy with your time. 10 controlling principles for the outward expression of simplicity. You guys ready? Okay, I'm doing it anyway. Number 1, buy things for their usefulness rather than their status. Buy things for their usefulness rather than their status. Number 2, reject anything that is producing an addiction in you. Simplicity is freedom, not slavery. That's not to say you can't have hobbies. But if your hobby begins to control you. Number 3, and what do I mean by control you? Look for undisciplined compulsions. When you're foregoing other things in order to facilitate this, and then you might have to hide that behavior or compensate in some way. Number 3, develop a habit of giving things away. That's a great thing to do. Number 4, refuse to be propagandized by the custodians of modern gadgetry. You don't need the latest and greatest, and it usually isn't.
So true.
Man, they had a sale on radio alarm saws. I've got a radio alarm saw. It's a good one. You know what? Everyone who comes to my house hears this story. That radio alarm saw right there, that was my dad's. That's the first saw that he ever taught me how to cut wood, cut angles, cut dado joints. And you know what? That Craftsman saw right there, it was made in the year I was born. That's right, it's 31 years old. Seriously, it was made the year I was born. It's 47 years old. Never been in the shop, never been repaired. It's still going. I don't need a radio alarm saw. I don't need a sawzall. My dog chewed the wire in half and half the handle off. But luckily we rewired it, put some tape around it, and she goes zzz when you hit the trigger, so it's good. It still saws all. You don't have to have the latest gadget.
Chaya?
What does the next phone do that this phone doesn't?
It's got 3 cameras. Why do you need 3 cameras?
You know why I had to get a new phone? There's been 2 reasons. Number 1, I had a phone that was so old they no longer updated the iOS or whatever that is. So I couldn't even use half of my things. So I was like, okay, well, and I had to do it with an iPad. Number 2, the second one, I broke it. You know what I'm going to replace this one? When either it won't update anymore or I break it. Okay, I'm sorry, moving on. I'm touching some nerves, I know, just trying to put things in perspective. Number 5, learn to enjoy things without owning them. Walks on the beach, public parks. There's these things called libraries where you can go and read books for free. Or $1.25 a year. Number 6, develop a deeper appreciation for the creation. Realize that you're a steward of that as well. And everything that we're consuming is polluting. Number 7, look with a healthy skepticism at all the buy now, pay later schemes.
Mm-hmm.
You know what we ended up doing? We took all of our credit cards and put them in a fireproof safe in a lockbox. So that if we want to use one, we have to go home and get it. By that time, we were usually like, we really need this. We set up a mechanism by which, and I said, we can do it one step further. I said, you put it in a lockbox that you have a combination, I'll put it in my gun safe that I have a combination, and then it's going to take
Dual
both
control.
of us in agreement. But you gotta have a good relationship to be able to do that, otherwise might have problems. Number 8, obey Jesus' instructions about plain, honest speech. Don't let greed violate your integrity. Number 9, reject anything that breeds the oppression of others. I take a look at how products are made. I take a look at where products are made. I take a look at the agendas and the movements that various companies pour money into before I shop there. Because I don't want to oppress anyone. Well, I've got to have that. That's the only store that's got it. Well, if they're oppressing a people in order to make it, or they're giving to people who are committed to abortion or whatever, I agree with that. Number 10, shun anything that distracts you from seeking first the kingdom of God. So, questions for self-reflection. Here's some things to pray about, think about. As Paul says, think on these things. Do I consider myself to be a materialistic person or a non-materialistic? Doesn't mean you have materialistic things. Or do they have you? Are you a materialistic person? Or do you find a lot of self-worth and enjoyment in it? Do I measure my worth by my wealth? Do I measure my worth by my wealth? Have I ever been called a workaholic? Remember, it's not just money. Is it difficult for me to take time off? I didn't write this list. I actually borrowed this from someone. Is it difficult for me to take time off? Am I freely generous, or do I tend to expect something in return for my charity? To include my tithe? Do I like to gamble? How do I manage to keep my gambling in check? Or do I make excuses? What do I do to cultivate generosity and gratitude in my life? You know, when we do things, so we might have a fundraiser at the church. And here's an example. So we do a golf fundraiser for our ministry to the military. Well, Pastor Dave, my buddy down in Rocky Mountain, they do a golf tournament as well. And as one of their prizes, they have a cash prize. In our tournament, one of the things that I'll notice, and some of you have been to our tournament, so you could verify this, there will be times where we're drawing the winners, and if they've already won something, they'll give their ticket to someone who hasn't, and say, hey, go pick something out. And I'm like, man, that's awesome. Because they pay for that ticket. At Dave's tournament, there was a $500 cash prize that had been built up. And Mike McDaniel won it. He's the guy who painted this church, my friend from King George. Boy, I hope his wife ain't watching right now because I might get in trouble. They called the number, he walked up, he said, that's me. And he walked up and they handed him that money. He said, great, can you put that in the offering plate for me tomorrow? Handed it right to him, said it softly, not loud for everybody to hear. And turned around and walked away. And I was like, that's it, right there. That's it. When we have fundraisers at the church, people might come out and say, well, I'll participate in this fundraiser and help raise money. But are you contributing money? You know, when we have a clothes drive, and I think it's not going to be just semi-annual clothes drives. We're going to have a continuation of clothes availability here. Are we just bringing the clothes we no longer want? Or are we willing to say, here's one of my favorite ones here, you go ahead and have this. That's what we're talking about on the issue of greed. Does that make sense to everybody? To see how it can control us, how it can originate within us, but how God is the ultimate answer. Okay? Any questions? Any comments? Since I went 15 minutes over. None? I answered everything. No one is going to struggle with greed ever again.
Can I say one thing?
Allison's going to struggle with greed. I'm sorry.
I mean, don't you think that you can be greedy? Well, I mean, obviously you can be greedy with your time, and I think about in the church especially, but anywhere really, but it's like you're greedy, you want to be in here to hear the word, but you don't want to serve somewhere or do something, or, you know, even greedy of your evening. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, and it's hard to do those things sometimes because you're like greedy for your time. And
Well, since Pastor Allison brought it up,
sorry, they all
I think you're exactly right. And that's, how does that manifest? Let me put it to you this way. There is an attitude of volunteerism in the church, in the sense that people come to the church and they say, well, I'm here, and I need you to recognize that. And I have no obligation, and you should be thankful that I'm here, almost like a volunteer, instead of that of a servant that says, here am I, Lord. Where does that attitude come in? That I am here for you to serve me, to sing the songs I want, to preach a message I agree with, to have a Chuck E. Cheese style children's church for my kids. Where does that come from? It comes from an attitude of entitlement, an attitude of greed. And even as people get saved, they'll say, okay, well, I will help you insofar as it does not conflict with these other things that I want. Now, sometimes people have legitimate work issues. I get that. Sometimes people have let work control them. And now they're pursuing that. And so they're working on Sundays in order to get that promotion or, that next title, instead of spending time with their family and with the family of God and things of that nature. There's no doubt. Or teaching a class on a Sunday morning, or helping with nursing, whatever the case might be. So in the same way we can be greedy with our time, we can be greedy with our talent, with our, I can't tell you how many people have contacted her and said, hey, I hear you guys are in need of a fill-in-the-blank musician / singer. What do you pay? Well, that right there tells me you're in it for the wrong reason. And I understand you've got to maintain a family and things of that nature. But the issue is, we tell folks all the time, when we started in ministry, we were scrubbing toilets. If you're coming in with the attitude of what's in it for me, you've already missed it, right? And that's not just for licensed ministers, that's across the board. But that's also indicative. It's not like, how dare you, pay your dues. What I'm saying is, why are you asking? Why are you not giving that time? And it's usually indicative of the greed factor and the effect the greed factors had. So there's a great book on this. I've got a copy in my office if you want to take a look at it. But the premise of that is, it's called Margins. It's a book by Richard Swenson. And what Richard Swenson says, he makes the point that in the early part of the 20th century, as Enlightenment is pushing its ridiculous assumptions, and it says, technology is exploding, we're going to be a utopian society, we're going to evolve as people of love, and we're all going to get along, and everything's going to be sugar and spice and everything nice. And the assumption by the middle of the century was technology will have advanced to the point that the average American work week would be 27 hours. That's what all of the proponents were saying across the board. Economics, philosophy, everybody was saying. More time with friends and family, 27-hour work week. How many people are working a 27-hour work? Okay. So what Margin says is that failed. But what didn't fail was that promise of stature, of achievement, of self-identity. We still pursue that. So he just defines margin this way. Imagine two circles, one inside the other. He said, the outside circle is your capacity. What you are physically, emotionally, and spiritually able to achieve in a given day, week, or month. The inner circle is your actual activity. How much time you are giving to the pursuit of work, taking care of your house, getting the kids to school, all that kind of stuff. Religious included. The bigger that inner circle gets, that area between the two circles he calls margin. And the closer those two come, the less margin you have. And the less margin you have, the quicker you're going to hit a breakdown. Because you can't keep up anymore. The problem is we try to find so many things inside that circle to find that happiness that we hit our capacity. In doing so, we end up neglecting the most important things. I did an illustration one. Mike Talon can still recite this for you, and this was at least 6 years ago. I did an illustration at the old church where I put up two big jars, and I had 4 different components, and it showed, I started off with sand, and I said, these are the fun things, and I filled up the jar, and then I had pebbles, and I said, here are the things that you gotta go to the doctor, you gotta pay your taxes, they are about X amount of time. And then I had golf balls, and I said, these are the necessities of, going to work and taking care of your house and your car issues and anything like that. And then I had these softballs. And I said, these represent your family, your religious walk with God, your contribution to community. And they wouldn't fit into the jar. And I said, does anyone else feel that way? That you just don't have time for those things because it's filled up with all the other. And they're like, yeah. And I said, let me show you something. And I went to the other jar and had the exact same measurements, and I put the softballs in first. And once I put them in, I put the golf balls in. And then I poured the little pebbles, and then I poured the sand in, and it all fitted. I said, if you'll get it in the proper order, God will take care of everything. It's the order that you're focusing. And what's the issue with the order on this left one? Greed. We're so focused on these first 2 things, bringing us to happiness, we're not rightly addressing family, God, and others. And even self. I tell people, when I go on my golf week in Myrtle Beach, when we go on a cruise, I don't apologize for that. Because if you don't take a sabbatical rest, you are going to break. It's like running your car without ever changing your oil. It's going to seize up eventually. You have to take time for you. You have to take time for your family. You've got to make daily time for your relationship with God, your growth in God. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all the rest will be added to you. That actually works. Right? So, great point, great question. I would encourage you to do it. And if you don't commit to those things, ask why. Ask why. Okay. So that